Faith Haven Church, a place of worship and solace, stood as a beacon of unity for its congregation. Every Sunday, families gathered here, seeking guidance and peace. Among them was Pastor James, a man deeply admired for his devotion and compassion. But on this particular Sunday, the church became the scene of an event that would leave its members in disbelief, a sacred space shattered by an act of violence. What could have led to such a shocking incident? What story lay behind the walls of this church? Pastor James dedicated his life to serving others, building a reputation as a compassionate leader and a source of guidance for many. His journey to the pulpit was marked by years of unwavering faith and a commitment to uplifting those around him. He shared his life with his wife, Angela, a devoted partner who stood by his side through every challenge. Together, they raised two children, creating a family admired by the congregation for their warmth and dedication to the church's mission. However, beneath the surface, there were complexities in Pastor James's personal life. His past included a relationship with Clara, the mother of his child, which brought challenges that remained unresolved. These elements, though rarely discussed, added another layer to his story. Clara's life was interwoven with that of Pastor James in ways that would later draw intense scrutiny. She was a member of the same community and had known Pastor James for several years before their personal relationship began. Clara was known to be resourceful and determined, carving out a life for herself while maintaining ties to those around her. Her connection to Pastor James was not just social, it was deeply personal. They shared a child, a bond that brought both joy and complexity to their lives. The relationship, though significant, was not without its challenges. After the relationship ended, they were left to navigate the responsibilities of co-parenting, a task that required constant communication and understanding. However, communication between the two was not always smooth. Disagreements over parenting approaches, financial responsibilities, and boundaries became recurring issues. These challenges placed a strain on Clara, who often found herself at odds with the man she once trusted. As time passed, Clara's frustrations began to grow. Balancing her role as a mother with her own personal struggles was demanding, and feelings of disappointment and resentment started to take hold. The unresolved tensions in their relationship, combined with differing perspectives on key issues, created an environment where conflict seemed inevitable. While many in the community saw Clara as a private individual who preferred to keep her personal matters away from public view, those closest to her noticed the weight of these unresolved issues. Her emotional state, shaped by years of discord and unmet expectations, became a critical factor in the events that would later unfold. Clara's perspective is central to understanding this story, offering insights into the complicated relationship dynamics and the challenges that led to a moment that would change everything. It began like any other Sunday morning at Faith Haven Church. Congregants arrived early, exchanging greetings and preparing for the service. The air was filled with the sound of hymns and quiet prayers as families settled into their seats. Pastor James, as always, was ready to lead the worship, offering words of encouragement to those who sought his guidance. At approximately 10:45 a.m., Clara arrived at the church. Her presence did not immediately raise concerns, as she was familiar to many in the congregation. She walked into the building, blending in with the crowd as the service progressed. Witnesses later recalled that she appeared calm, giving no indication of the turmoil that lay ahead. As Pastor James delivered his sermon from the altar, Clara made her way closer to the front. Congregants described the moment as unusual but not alarming, assuming she wanted to speak with him after the service. However, what happened next stunned everyone present. Without warning, Clara produced a firearm and directed it at Pastor James. Gas filled the sanctuary as the congregation froze in disbelief. A single shot rang out, echoing through the church and bringing the service to a horrifying halt. Pastor James collapsed on the altar, his wife and others rushing toward him in panic. Witnesses described the chaos that ensued as members of the congregation screamed and scrambled to safety. Several parishioners attempted to subdue Clara, while others called for emergency assistance. This day, meant to be one of worship and reflection, became a moment of tragedy that no one in Faith Haven Church would ever forget. Immediately following the shooting, law enforcement was called to the scene. Within minutes, officers arrived at Faith Haven Church, securing the area and ensuring that the safety of the remaining congregants was prioritized. The church, once a place of peace, was now under the control of the police as they began their investigation into what had transpired. Clara, after firing the fatal shot, was quickly apprehended by several members of the congregation who had attempted to disarm her. Once in the custody of the police, Clara was escorted from the church without further incident. Authorities then turned their attention to the scene of the crime. The weapon used in the shooting was carefully recovered. It was a handgun, legally registered to Clara, though the circumstances of how it came into her possession on that day were soon called into question. Investigators also looked into Clara's recent activities and any prior interactions she had with Pastor James that might provide insight into the motive for the attack. Authorities discovered that, in the months leading up to the shooting, Clara had expressed frustration over unresolved issues with Pastor James, particularly around their shared child and matters of custody and financial support. These tensions had apparently been building for some time, but there were no clear threats or public signs that Clara intended to harm Pastor James. However, detectives uncovered evidence of past arguments and emotional strain between the two, some of which had been witnessed by mutual acquaintances. The breakdown of their relationship, combined with Clara's feelings of abandonment and resentment, seemed to have contributed to the violent outcome. As the investigation unfolded, the community was left in shock. Faith Haven Church, which had been a place of solace and support for many, was now a symbol of the devastating event that had occurred within its walls. Congregants interviewed by reporters expressed disbelief and sadness, some struggling to understand how such an act could happen in a place they trusted. Many described Pastor James as a man of peace, a leader who had touched the lives of so many. In the weeks following the tragedy, Pastor James's family was left to mourn. His wife, Angela, along with their children, was left devastated by the sudden loss. Pastor James had been more than a husband and father. He had been the heart of their family and their church. His death left an irreplaceable void in the lives of those who loved him. Angela spoke publicly, expressing her grief and shock. She called the loss of her husband a tragedy not only for their family, but for the entire community. In interviews, Angela revealed the deep emotional toll the incident had taken on their children, who struggled to understand the events that led to their father's death. The aftermath of the shooting left the congregation searching for answers, wondering how something so violent could have happened within the confines of their church. As law enforcement continued its investigation, the community grappled with the pain and loss of a man who had been a pillar of support and guidance for so many. In the months following the tragic events at Faith Haven Church, the legal proceedings began. Clara was charged with the murder of Pastor James, with additional charges related to the possession and use of a firearm in the commission of a crime. The case quickly attracted attention, as it involved a respected community leader, a violent act within the sacred space of a church, and a complex web of personal history between the victim and the accused. Clara's defense attorney argued that the incident had been a result of intense emotional distress, citing the years of unresolved issues and tension between Clara and Pastor James. They suggested that Clara's actions were influenced by the pain and frustration of being unable to resolve her co-parenting struggles and her personal grievances with him. While not denying the act, Clara's legal team emphasized that she had never intended to kill him, but rather acted impulsively in a moment of overwhelming emotion. On the other hand, the prosecution painted a picture of premeditated violence. They argued that Clara had brought a weapon to the church with the intent to harm Pastor James. The prosecution highlighted Clara's escalating frustrations over several months, her actions before the shooting, and the calculated manner in which she approached the altar. They pointed to her clear motive, built upon years of unresolved conflict with Pastor James. The courtroom was filled with emotional testimonies from those who had witnessed the events that day, as well as from those who had known Pastor James. Angela, the widow of Pastor James, took the stand to speak about her husband's character and the profound loss she and their children had experienced. She described the shock and heartbreak of watching Pastor James, a man who had dedicated his life to helping others, suddenly taken from them in such a violent and senseless way. Other members of the congregation also gave testimony, recounting the horror they witnessed when Clara interrupted the service and fired the fatal shot. They spoke about the chaos that unfolded, their desperate attempts to help Pastor James, and the trauma they faced in the aftermath of the tragedy. These testimonies painted a vivid picture of the traumatic impact the shooting had on the church community. As the trial continued, Clara's emotional state was carefully examined by both the defense and prosecution. Witnesses testified about her struggles, her state of mind leading up to the shooting, and her ongoing emotional difficulties with the breakdown of her relationship with Pastor James. The defense painted a picture of a woman in deep distress, while the prosecution emphasized the weight of her actions and the irreversible consequences they had caused. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the case went to the jury. The members of the jury were tasked with deciding Clara's fate, taking into account the evidence presented, the emotional testimonies, and the facts of the case. Finally, after a tense deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Clara was found guilty of second-degree murder and several related charges, including unlawful possession of a firearm. The judge carefully reviewed the circumstances of the case, acknowledging the emotional distress Clara had been under, but also noting the gravity of her actions. The judge sentenced Clara to a lengthy prison term, though the exact length was determined by the severity of her crime and the need for justice for the life that had been taken. The outcome of the trial brought no comfort to those who had lost Pastor James. His family, still reeling from the loss, attended the trial, hoping for a sense of closure. The community, though also seeking justice, found no solace in the conviction, as the tragedy that had unfolded in their church would leave an enduring mark on their lives. The tragic shooting of Pastor James sent shockwaves through the community that went far beyond the confines of Faith Haven Church. For the congregation, the loss was unimaginable. Pastor James had been a spiritual leader, a source of guidance, and a beloved figure to many. His death, in the very place where he had spent so much of his life helping others, left a deep void. In the days and weeks that followed, the church, once a sanctuary of peace, became a place of mourning and sorrow. The grieving process for the congregation was a painful journey. Many struggled to come to terms with what had happened, unable to reconcile the image of their pastor, who had led them with love and compassion, with the violent event that had unfolded before their eyes. The church that had once been a place of hope and comfort was now a symbol of loss and trauma. Congregation members spoke of the difficulty of attending services in the weeks after the shooting, as the memories of that fateful day weighed heavily on them. For some, it took months to even step foot in the church again, while others found solace in coming together, sharing their pain, and finding strength in each other's support. Pastor James's family, too, was left grappling with an overwhelming grief. His widow, Angela, described the difficulty of explaining the loss to their children, who were too young to fully understand why their father was suddenly gone. The pain of losing a husband, father, and pillar of their family was immense. Angela spoke publicly about her struggle to find meaning in the tragedy, describing her emotional roller coaster as she dealt with her sorrow and the challenge of keeping her family together in the aftermath. Despite the deep sadness, there was a collective effort to heal. Church leaders, along with community members, came together to support one another. Healing was not something that would come overnight, but they understood that they had to rebuild, both emotionally and spiritually. Support groups were organized for those affected by the tragedy, offering a space for people to process their grief. Counselors were brought in to help guide the congregation through their pain, and church services, though initially subdued, gradually began to take on a sense of renewal. The process of restoring faith and trust within the community was a slow and careful one. There were difficult conversations about forgiveness, betrayal, and the impact of unresolved personal conflicts. Pastor James had been a man who preached about the importance of forgiveness, yet his death had left many wondering how to move forward with such profound loss and unanswered questions. Some struggled with feelings of anger and betrayal, particularly towards Clara, whose actions had forever changed their lives. Others, however, tried to follow the example Pastor James had set by offering forgiveness, understanding that holding on to resentment would only deepen the pain. Throughout the healing process, the community was forced to reflect on the broader implications of the tragedy. The events had sparked discussions about the nature of relationships, the consequences of unresolved conflicts, and the dangers of letting pain fester. Many questioned how such personal issues could escalate to the point of violence, especially within the walls of a church. The pain of betrayal was felt deeply by the congregation, as they came to terms with the idea that someone they had known and trusted had been responsible for the loss of their leader. In the months following Pastor James's death, a sense of reconciliation began to emerge. Church services started to focus on themes of healing and rebuilding, with an emphasis on the power of forgiveness. The community worked hard to find ways to move forward, understanding that while the pain of the loss would never disappear, they could honor Pastor James's memory by continuing to support one another and stay united. Though the wounds of the tragedy remained, they also became a catalyst for change. The community understood that true healing would come not just through time, but through their efforts to listen, support, and rebuild together. Faith Haven Church slowly began to regain its role as a place of solace, even as the memory of what had happened lingered in the hearts and minds of those who had been touched by the violence. In the aftermath of Pastor James's tragic death, the community sought closure in various ways. Family members, church leaders, and community experts shared their thoughts on the lasting effects of the tragedy. For Angela, Pastor James's widow, closure would never come easily. The grief of losing her husband in such a violent and unexpected way was something that time alone could not heal. However, she found some comfort in the support she received from loved ones in the congregation, knowing that Pastor James's work and legacy would live on in the hearts of many. Congregation leaders, too, spoke about the enduring impact of the tragedy. The death of Pastor James had shaken the very foundation of Faith Haven Church, but over time, they witnessed a resilience within the congregation. It became clear that, while healing was a long and challenging process, the lessons Pastor James had imparted would continue to guide them. The faith that he had nurtured in their lives, his teachings of love, forgiveness, and hope, became a source of strength as they moved forward. Experts who reflected on the incident spoke about the importance of addressing personal struggles before they reach a breaking point. The events surrounding Pastor James's death underscored how unresolved conflicts, especially in close personal relationships, can have devastating consequences. The tragedy served as a stark reminder of the need for open communication, therapy, and intervention when emotional or psychological challenges arise. For those who had known Pastor James, and for those impacted by the events of that fateful day, there was a collective understanding that personal struggles, when ignored, can have far-reaching effects. As the community slowly found its way toward healing, they also honored Pastor James's memory. A memorial tribute was held in his honor, where his life and legacy were celebrated. The tribute featured a heartfelt montage of his life, from his early days as a preacher to his work in the community. Images of him delivering powerful sermons, helping those in need, and spending time with his family filled the screen, reminding everyone of the good he had done during his time on earth. In those moments of remembrance, the community reflected not only on the tragedy, but on the profound impact Pastor James had on so many lives. His work, his words, and his unwavering faith had inspired many. Though his life was cut short, the lessons he had taught would continue to resonate, urging others to seek help when needed, to address personal struggles with compassion, and to always act with love and understanding. Pastor James may have been taken from them too soon, but his spirit and the lessons of his life would remain for generations to come. If you found this documentary insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another true crime story. Stay with us for more captivating cases as we continue to explore the mysteries that change lives. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.